I had a lot of self-pity. Like, why did this turn out to be my life? I don't understand. I don't deserve this. What did I do? I'm acting like a victim. I'm not taking control of my life. It just felt like there had to be more. I was 3 chapters shy when he died. It was the perfect form of self-care. Who would think that that would be something to do at a time like this? Anyone who has lost a loved one knows that one of the hardest times is...
Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Good Grief. Today, I'm going to be chatting with Debbie Weiss over in the States, all around prioritizing self-care, especially when you're walking a caregiver's journey. Debbie has been on this path now for 30 years and has got a wealth of experience. So I'm very excited to dive into that conversation. And if you are a long-time listener, thanks for coming back. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. You've joined at a great time. And if you found value in this podcast, all we would ask is that you hit a rating on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, wherever you're listening from. That would give us the feedback to know that, hey, you're finding value in this, and it also pushes it out to other grievers that are looking for support and love and kindness as well. So if you could hit a 5-star rating or even leave a comment, that'd be amazing. And we appreciate you so much. But without further ado, let me introduce Debbie. She has been caregiving now for 30 years. She is an author, and we had a great chat last week, and I'm excited to dive into this conversation because, to be honest, this isn't an area that I have spent much time in myself personally. I have had family that have become sick and passed away, but I have not been a primary carer, let alone much of a carer in that regard at all. So I think there's a wealth of knowledge and experience that we can draw from here. And I'm excited to have some pink on the show as well. Debbie, welcome. How you doing?
Good, Ryan. How are you?
I'm so good. Last time we were chatting, the Jets were kicking off their season. I've got to find out, did they win? Did we get up?
Not that night, but
No.
We've already played a second time, so we're 1-1.
Okay, cool. Man, you guys over there, man, like sports happen so fast. We're one game a week. I mean, we're off topic here already, but that's what we're going to do today. Is NFL one a week? Like what's...
It is one a week. But
Okay.
Over the last several years, they've expanded their broadcasting. So now there's a Thursday night game, a Sunday game, a Sunday night game, and a Monday night game. So it just so happens that the Jets schedule, they're playing 3 games in 11 days because They started on Monday night, then they played the next Sunday, and they're playing this Thursday. Not a great way, tough schedule to start.
I mean, we hit it off straight away because you had your Jets jersey on. I don't support, any team, but I know that we talked about Gary V, who I think you've bumped heads with, or he went to your school or something like that. He wants to buy the Jets. So that's how we kicked off our conversation. And you're off to Vegas tomorrow. Is that right, for the Dome?
Oh my goodness. You are really a good listener. I'm a
jealous listener.
I'm off to Vegas with my 2 cousins on Thursday for 3 nights to go see the Eagles, the band, the Eagles.
So cool.
I don't know if you know who that is, depending on your age.
Come on now. I was raised on the Eagles. Mum and Dad had them playing in our living room.
All right. Perfect. Well, we're diehard fans, and they are opening up at the Sphere in Las Vegas. And so that's supposed to be a whole immersive experience. So we're going to see them actually Friday and Saturday because we're crazy enough to do that.
So good. I love that. And today we're chatting about your journey, obviously through caregiving. And man, you've got quite a long history with this and with a number of different people in your world. Do you want to just give us some of that context and backstory? Because following you now for a little while, seeing some of your content and some of the stories that you share along the journey, man, really, really powerful stuff. Yeah. Can you just give us some backstory as to how this began, where
Absolutely.
It started?
Sure. Now, not to, call you out or to call my age out, but it's really been over 40 years. I
Oh,
think
I
I'm
said
coming
30,
close
yeah.
to 45 years of
Okay.
caregiving. Oh my
Hey,
goodness. I shouldn't really correct you because now you'll know, but through the story, it's okay. I don't care about my age. I'm proud of my age. So I did start as a caregiver for my dad when I was 17. He had a massive stroke. He was only 46 years old and he survived. But my parents soon after divorced and he was permanently disabled. He lived for 30 years. Maybe that's the 30. He lived for 30 years from the time that he had the stroke. And for that 30 years, I was his primary caregiver.
wow.
Now, he didn't live with me, but you can still be somebody's caregiver, even if they don't live with you.
Sure.
So right from the get-go, I was responsible for figuring out everything, where he was going to live. We did not have a lot of money once he lost his job and he could no longer work. My parents weren't in a position to have a boatload of savings, so we had to figure that out, or I had to figure that out with some of the insurance that he had. So it was doctors. It was, could he cook for himself? Did he need groceries? So
Wow.
many,
And
every single thing that you can think of,
how
finances.
how quickly do you have to mature in that situation? Sounds like, I mean, I don't know. Did you have siblings?
So I do. I have one younger sibling, but he's 4 years younger. So
Yeah.
he was only 13.
So you're 17, you got to grow up real
Mm-hmm.
fast. How
Yes.
did you feel like, because I mean, 30 years, 30 years until he passed, and
Mm-hmm.
you don't know when that day's coming at all. And so you just start the journey thinking one day at a time. But did you have to put your life on hold as a teenager, like in the prime of your teen years?
Mm. So what happened was it was actually the day after I graduated from high school that he had the stroke. And so I was going to be going away to college for the first time 2 months later. When that time came, let me just also say that I had been with my boyfriend of the time for a little over a year, and it was super serious. And just the idea of leaving him was difficult. So I was
Absolutely.
leaving him. I was leaving my father, who I was daddy's little girl. And I felt that, my parents' marriage was not great at that point. So I just felt like who else was going to take care of him as well as I would, or be as kind and caring, I guess. Not
For
that my
sure.
mother would ever not take care of him, but just at a different level.
Mm.
And so I really didn't want to go, but I went.
Wow.
And I have to say that when I was there, it was very difficult for me to kind of get immersed in the college experience, because here's everybody else who's, away from home for the first time, carefree, partying, all of that. And soon after I went to school, my dad went to have some experimental brain surgery to try and reconnect the blood flow in his brain.
Whoa.
And my mother would not let me come home for the surgery. And I was devastated because, one, it was scary. Is he
Yeah.
going to survive this surgery? And I couldn't stand the fact that I couldn't be there.
Mm.
So my mom and I, really bumped heads a lot during this time period. Of course, now fast forward, as a mother of a son who's a senior in college, I certainly understand where she was coming from, because she didn't want my life to be ruined.
Sure.
But I was torn apart.
Yep.
Eventually, my aunt, my father's sister, who I'm extremely close to, interceded for me and just convinced my mother that I couldn't handle it. I could not handle being away from home during this tumultuous period. So I did actually leave the college that I had gone to, came home, lived at home, and attended a local university that I just commuted to, and had a part-time job. But in the meantime, I was home. I helped my father do physical therapy every day. I helped him take a shower. I helped him with everything. After about a year or so, I did start feeling a little bit of regret that I had missed the whole college experience.
Yeah,
And
totally.
this
I
was
can see
going to
that.
be my only chance, right? I wasn't
Uh-huh.
going to be able to go away at 25. Even though I was going to get a college degree, I did not have the college experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the end, I actually decided to transfer away from home to yet a third university.
Right.
And I did complete my junior and senior year. So I did have, in the end, I did have an
The
experience at least
experience.
for 2 years. And
Sure.
um,
And
yeah, so it did definitely start my life off a little differently than I expected.
yeah, I mean, I can totally relate to that as well. And I think everyone listening can relate in no matter where they are. You know, you're at the sort of starting point. Some people are, in their 30s, 40s, 50s when, tragedy happens or hits, and it just changes the course of our life. Like, and there's no way that we can look in hindsight to see what decisions, you don't get that. You just have to make the decisions that you feel in your gut, in your heart, that you feel led to. And that's what you did. I mean, I empathize with you. I think, man, I would have shot straight home if I could have as well. That would have been my heart cry for sure. So I'm right there with you. And so, that journey you said spanned 30 years. Um, there are also other people in your world that you've also cared for. Do you want to share a bit about them as well?
Sure. So when I had my oldest son, he was diagnosed at the age of 2 with autism spectrum disorder. Wasn't as common as it is today. He's 23, so
Yeah.
it's been a while, and things have luckily evolved greatly since he was 20 or he was 2. So that kind of obviously being a parent is a caregiver, right? You might not think of it, but being a parent is certainly a caregiver. But being the parent of somebody with special needs just kind of exponentially increases the load and the
Totally.
concern. I think, it's just so different experiences. Not, of course, that I wasn't concerned about my father. I was, but anybody who's a parent knows that when it's your child, it's a completely different feeling. And from the minute that he was diagnosed, I just had this desperation to figure out how to help him.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because there is no cure and there is no one size fits all.
That's right.
And back then nothing, and I don't know how it works in Australia, but back then nothing was covered by our health insurance. So anything that I chose to do, or my husband and I chose to do, was out of our pockets.
Whoa.
And I just had that desperate feeling. For some reason in my mind, kindergarten was like the end point. I don't know why. And but in my mind, I just thought, geez, if I could just get him, I don't want to say normal, but looking fairly typical by kindergarten, he'll be good. What can I do between now and then? And I just educated myself, dragged this poor kid every place that I could think of, spent money that we did not have, amassed a boatload of debt that 23 years later I'm still paying off, but I wouldn't change it because none of that mattered.
Yeah, it's your son. And you mentioned it in passing. You said your eldest he's now in college or graduating. Is that what you just?
No, my eldest is the one who has the autism spectrum disorder. My youngest is a senior in college.
Your youngest is
so they were only 21 months apart.
Wow. Okay.
So, and another story, I went through in vitro fertilization to have them both. So my second one was kind of like a miracle baby, but I felt so strongly when I realized that my oldest had, had these social issues. I just so desperately wanted him to have a sibling.
Yeah, sure. And can I ask, you said he was diagnosed at the age of 2. Were there because I'm just curious. I've got a cousin who we just saw on the weekend, cerebral palsy, and she's 32 now, but severe cerebral palsy. But they knew that from birth. With autism, you said diagnosed at 2. Was there any signs prior, or did they develop? How does that come about?
So now I think there's so much more awareness that I think they are diagnosing kids at an earlier age. You know, when it's your first, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Sure. Yeah,
You
for
don't
sure.
know what to look for. You're looking at the markers. How old are they supposed to be when they first roll, when they first sit, all those things. He was hitting those maybe on
Mhm.
the little bit of the later side. It wasn't until he was 15 months and went for a pediatrician checkup, and the pediatrician said to me, "Does he follow directions?" And I said,
Right.
"What do you
He's
mean?"
yeah, he's just a
And he
baby.
said, "Well,
Like,
if you say, 'get the ball,' will he do it?"
right.
And I thought, I have no idea. I don't know if I ever
Mm.
tried to give him a direction. And he said, "Well, does he hear you?" Well, first he asked if he said any words, and he didn't. He said, "Can he hear you? How do you know he can hear?" And I said, "Because he loves music. He loves the Wiggles. He loves all that stuff. Like, obviously, I know he can hear."
Sure.
And that's kind of what started the
Yeah.
whole process and the whole ball rolling.
Yeah, that's so, I mean, and our kids are perfect when they're born. Like we've just had a daughter, which I shared with you, and like I wouldn't know any different. Like I'm just fumbling my way through this, Kaylee and I, and we're just going like, well, we think she's on track. Sure, we've got midwives and the people around us that we have those checkups, but we were very worried in the beginning because she had to have, and this might be new, like 2024 or newer, where they have hearing checks very early on. And we were quite concerned because we actually thought that she wasn't hearing, you know, sounds the way she might. And so, yeah, it definitely put some concern and some anxious thoughts as you line up for those exams and those tests and so forth. What's your son's name? So I can, both your sons,
Sure. So my oldest one is named Sam, and my younger one is Ben.
Sam and Ben, love that. And
Thank
tell
you.
us a bit about your husband.
So my husband was a great guy that everybody loved, but who didn't like to socialize, which was just the oddest thing.
Sure. So tell us, he dealt with, some depression and anxiety for some time as well before he got quite sick. Do you want to share a bit of that journey before it turned
Absolutely.
to an illness?
Yep. So I started by saying he had some social anxiety, but everybody loved him. And he had some quirks that we just used to make fun of. And he was so good at making fun of himself. He laughed a
That's a
lot.
good quality.
Yeah, exactly. And, but over time, let me just also say, he and I worked together. So after we got married, I got this opportunity to move to a different state from New York to New Jersey and open up this insurance agency for a big name company through a
Mhm.
friend of mine that I actually met at the second university that I went to, or the
Right.
third university. And I didn't want to do this because I'm not a salesperson. And my friend said, "Yeah, but Gary, my husband, that's what he did. He didn't sell insurance, but he sold building supplies and lumber. And like I said, he
Sure.
could chat it up with anyone.
Hmm.
He was just such a nice guy, easy to talk to. It was a gift, and he had it. And so we decided to take the leap only a year after we were married, move, and give this a try and work together. Even though it was my insurance agency, it had to be in one person's name and it was going to be in mine.
Sure.
The idea was I had the business knowledge to run the business, but he had the sales ability.
Got it.
And it was very, very tricky, especially with our marriage and us being under a lot of stress, not having any idea what we were doing. But once we figured it out, and it took a while, we worked together for 20 years.
Wow.
But what I started to notice was that And I used to joke that when he turned 50, he went through male menopause. It
Mm-hmm.
seemed to be, for me, noticing around that age that he just started to get more anxious,
Sure.
a little more irritable. I did not realize as time was going on that it was depression. It took me such a long time to realize that.
Well, it's very sneaky
And
depression. That's why.
it is. It really is. And, honestly, the way I found out, and I don't want to jump all over the place, we can go back to this. Sam, after the autism diagnosis, has a lot of other diagnoses, also including anxiety and depression.
Sure. Yep.
So I started to, observe it in him and
Yeah,
kind
you
of
could
put the
see it.
pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
So he was coming to work, and all of a sudden we couldn't find him. He was taking a chair and like going in a back room and falling asleep.
Asleep. Yep. I can see
Asleep.
that coming totally.
Yep. Or we would drive separately because we did different things after work or whatever. And he would call me and say, I had to pull over by the side of the road and get sick on the way here.
Wow.
And he also had Crohn's disease. So I kept thinking it was a gastro, problem.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
But it was anxiety. Eventually, one day, he walked out of the office and told me, I am never coming back here.
Just like
Not
that.
to home, just to work. Never. And he walked out and he left stacks. He also had ADHD. So he was the best procrastinator, he and Sam. And stacks of papers. I didn't know, do I have to do anything with this? Do you owe anyone phone calls?
So it had reached that point where he just couldn't take it any longer. Mind was in overwhelm. That's it. I'm calling the shot and I'm out.
Yep.
Whoa.
Yep.
Do you feel that stress and anxiety that he was under and dealing with so differently? Because you were both under stress, from business and marriage, working together. There are so many elements to that. And I understand because my wife and I work together. Do you feel that potentially, all of that stress led to then his sickness?
No, because I've asked this a million times,
Right.
because I couldn't believe that it didn't. It was just, honestly, his sickness was the cruelest twist of fate. After he left work, I thought to myself, okay, I have to look at this positively, even though I was really scared about things in my office. But I thought maybe at home now, he'll be more present, because he was all of a sudden not shopping. He was not excited about the Jets.
Sure.
Like that was his big thing, where I thought it's the stress of work. Now the stress of work is gone. All of these things will come back, but they never did. And he seemed to just get worse and worse at home.
Wow.
Eventually, because a year or so before, my son had been involuntarily hospitalized into a mental hospital. Sam said to me, you've got to get Dad into a hospital.
Wow.
And that's when I kind of realized that now Gary wouldn't get out of bed for days at a time. Or if he did, he was so nasty to us. And I said, Sam, again, I don't know what the rules are there, but here, unless you voluntarily agree, right? Then there are very stringent rules of how you can keep someone against their will. And mostly it's if they're going to inflict harm on themselves or someone else.
Yep.
And that really wasn't the case. And so once I think I called a hotline, and I think they sent someone here, but they said, nope, he doesn't want to go. We can't make him go. Something happened the next time. I don't recall how. And they came and they did take him. And he wound up going into the hospital only for a week. He came out And I'm telling you, Ryan, it was like he was a new man. He was
Really?
upbeat, smiley. This is someone now at this point, he was
That's
64
that's
years old, I think.
like a night and day turnaround.
Night and day. He was all of a sudden, so he had never in the past, he'd been to therapists, but he never enjoyed it. So he really shied away from it. He turned out to be like the model therapy patient in the groups
Wow.
that he did online once he came home. And for the first time, all of us just felt so hopeful.
Totally.
He still had anxiety. Like he was still on the
Yeah.
edge with the anxiety, but just his outlook and
Huge
his,
uplift.
it was amazing.
Mm.
And then 6 weeks later, out of the blue, he's told that he has terminal blood cancer, unrelated to any other illness that he's had. I mean, talk about cruel.
Yeah.
To all of us,
When there's so much hope in the room,
finally.
things are turning around. Wow. And so that journey from there wasn't long at all.
It was 6 months.
6 months.
6
till
months.
he passed.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And honestly, in that 6 months, the mental illness got so bad. And that wound up being, for me, the hardest part.
The harder part. Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned to me, when we chatted last week around this, the mental side and the physical side of the sickness, the mental, as you just mentioned, being the hardest part, but you'd really felt like that stretched a decade prior already. So you'd already been trudging through, the mud, so to speak, battling this thing. The black dog, that's what they call it, the black dog. And so you add on then a terminal illness, and you've been looking after your son, you looked after your dad. Where are you at this point as a caregiver?
Well, let's see. So backtracking a little bit, while he was still, functioning when I turned 50. 50 for me was kind of this, something about that number was a realization that I lived 50 years now and I had no idea who I was.
Wow.
I was just exhausted. I was angry. I was resentful. I don't want to make it sound like I was walking around with a, sourpuss on my face. I wasn't. I've always been an upbeat person, but yet I also I had a lot of self-pity. Like, why did this turn out to be my life? I don't understand, I don't deserve this. What did I do? And all of these things. And something about that number made me really realize that I can't control all of the events and circumstances of my life. I can only control how I react to them. And instead of, and again, I'm doing the right thing for everyone, but I'm feeling sorry for myself. I'm acting like a victim. I'm not taking control of my life, regardless of my circumstances. I'm letting these circumstances just kind of lead me down, the river of life, wherever it was going to take me. And I think because of the 50, something about 50 made me think, gosh, in a second, my life is going to be over.
Wow.
And I don't want to look back and say, gosh, what happened? You never got to experience something for yourself, something that you wanted. And I didn't have anything that I wanted. There was no long lost dream of something. It wasn't that. It just felt like there had to be more. Not that I wouldn't take care of my loved ones, all of them, again, because I would. But this time I wouldn't do it at the expense of myself.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like being such a giver, you just poured out everything over all of those years and left nothing in there for a dream or a goal for yourself.
Exactly. And it was that realization. So somewhere in my early to mid 50s, I really started journeying down, discovering who am I? What do I want? What do I like? And I'm still on that journey. So by the time that Gary got sick, I had been well on that journey, honestly.
Sure.
So I had, learned self-care techniques that I continued to, they change, but.
So why don't we dive into some of those? Because I think that'd be so practical and helpful for people. Caregiver or not, I think self-care is something, especially through grief and loss, that we feel guilt and shame around. Something as simple as laughing, which you and I love to do. The first time we got on the call, we're chatting, we're just laughing, we feel guilt around that because we shouldn't laugh because they're not here anymore and so forth. So that's like the start of the journey, I would say, of self-care, just being able to laugh again. But share, what are some of the best self-care practices that you've discovered and created for yourself?
I think some of them are things that I didn't realize were self-care. For me, I learned to say no. I always, maybe it's just, I'm a people pleaser. I want people to like me. If somebody needed help, with an organization, they needed me to volunteer. Sure, I'll do that. Well, what do you mean, sure, you'll do that? I was already overcommitted, but I didn't say no. Even a social thing.
So what's the first step to saying no? Like when your initial response is just a yes, what's the thought process or a framework that maybe you've got to say no?
Well, first of all, I didn't realize I was doing it. It was a friend who pointed it out to me. So I had no awareness over it. So I'd say the first thing is to take a hard look at yourself and say, are you doing that?
Yeah.
Because I had no idea. And the tool, I think, for me is, especially when it came to like a commitment like volunteering, do not answer. Do not answer on the spot. Mm-hmm. Say, let me give it some time. I'll get back to you tomorrow. Whatever, give it at least 24 hours before you agree to anything.
So good.
I think that. I've also, and this I am still evolving with, I don't have to say yes to a social situation just because I think I should. If it's not going to serve me, and I'll give you an example. I have a friend and she has two other friends and they're acquaintances to me. They're not people that I, have a one-on-one relationship with. And they used to get together, the three of them, for dinner a few times a year. And somehow, since Gary died, that's probably the reason, they included me. And the last time I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not really enjoying this conversation.
I don't enjoy being there. I've been in that. I think everyone can relate to that. Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Why am my time is precious. All our time is precious.
Why am I subjecting myself to this time and space when I'm not enjoying it?
So just the other day, and I hope they're not listening to this podcast,
That's the other day. It's a lesson if they are,
It is.
It's a lesson for everybody.
And it's nothing personal, right? I mean, totally. It is what it is. And I just got a text and I didn't answer, but I knew what my answer was.
Yep.
And I said, that date doesn't work for me. You guys have a great time.
That's such a great response. I love that. Now, we can go down hypotheticals and they say, well, what about these next 10 dates? How about those? But eventually there might come a time where you say, look, guys, I love you all, but this isn't the kind of environment that I'm able to be in right now. that could be a simple response. I think that's so good, sharing that. Boundaries are such a huge part of life in general. I think they get compounded when we walk through grief and loss. And so I love that, saying no. Thanks, Debbie. That's huge. Good reminder for me as well. What would be another self-care practice that you
So,
use?
on the topic of boundaries, that's what I started doing with my family.
Sure.
Is, for me, exercise that I enjoy.
I see you walking all the
Besides it
time.
being,
You're always out walking.
no, I know in my videos I'm walking, but that's walking my dog.
Oh,
No,
right.
I like to dance. So I like to do like Zumba
Oh,
or
that's so cool.
jazzercise, like old lady dance aerobics kind of thing.
Oh, it's high heart
So
rate stuff. That's good.
it
And can,
is.
and can you just share for a moment, because part of our good grief model is there are three parts to it. One is developing a positive mind, one is a connected spirit, and the third element is a healthy body. And can you just talk to that, area of Zumba? When did you pick it up? Were you doing it since you were 17, or was it after 50? Like, when did you pick it up?
So I picked up jazzercise was really my thing that I picked up. So, oh gosh, you know what, Ryan, you're going to have me go down a whole other way
All right.
road.
Okay,
It's a whole story. Look,
we can rein
I've
it
had a
in.
lifelong weight problem.
Uh-huh.
A lifelong weight problem.
I can
But
say
I've
you don't
always
look
loved
like that. You look
exercise.
great.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But I've always loved exercise. I played sports as a kid. I've always loved exercise. And so I specifically found like the jazzercise or that dance aerobics, I think around the time I was in my late 20s.
Okay.
And so I was doing it. I actually really did do it for 30 years. And then I started doing Zumba when something happened with my local jazzercise. But then there was a time where I stopped or I wasn't going as regularly. And I said, because God forbid, I couldn't leave for an hour because someone needed something or someone needed to be somewhere. Or I was putting too much stress on Gary. And finally I said, no, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever it was, 6:45 to 7:45, I am leaving and I am going.
That's those
And
boundaries.
that's that.
Yeah.
Yep. And they had to understand that. And I had to understand, you know what? I don't need to be here every second. They have gotten used to it. And I've created this. And now I have to uncreate it, right? I have to dismantle it.
And it's great. You come back a better human. You come back a better person when you take care of yourself. We use the analogy quite often in terms of, and we flew interstate just on the weekend. And what do they say about, if the oxygen masks drop down from the airplane? Fit your mask first, because if you don't have oxygen, you can't help anybody else. So this area of like self-care, whether it's exercise, whether it's a coffee date with a friend, whether it's walking the dog, or golf, for all of the golf lovers, taking care of yourself first is a massive, it's mental, it's physical, it's spiritual, but then the ripple effect of that, whether you're caregiving in your case, or whether you're just trying to take care of the kids around the house, which you did say is a role of caregiving, plays a huge part. I love that you've done jazzercise and Zumba. I think that's so good to get the heart rate up. Okay, these are great. I'm taking notes. We've got boundaries and saying no. We've got self-care, prioritizing yourself, locking in something once, twice, maybe 3 times a week. What else have you got there that you really love?
All right. So it's something that I just discovered in the last couple of years, and it's kind of counterintuitive and sounds a little crazy. When Gary got diagnosed, right prior to that, I had for months this idea. People had put in my head for a long time that I needed to write a book about my life and my story. And I have no experience in writing. I didn't like writing. I did numbers, not words. And I was listening to a podcast that I don't regularly listen
All right.
to. And they had a guest on, and her job was helping first-time authors get their stories out there.
So good.
And I thought, if that's not a whisper or a yell
The
that's
stars are
hitting me
aligning.
over the head right now.
Yeah.
So I contacted her and instantly connected with her. And she was launching a 12-week course for first-time authors.
It's great.
And I was scared, and I didn't believe that I would actually be able to do this writing thing. But yet it kept calling back to me. And then Gary got the terminal blood cancer diagnosis. And I was seeing a therapist at the time. And I said to the therapist, I am actually embarrassed that I am going to say this out loud at a time when my husband was just, diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I tell her about the class. And I said, I know it's ridiculous. It's obviously not the time. And she said, no, I disagree. I think this is the perfect time because you are going to need something separate from everything that's going to go on, something just for you. And I said to her, well, what if there's homework and I show up and I don't have the homework? Or what happens if I can't go because, there's an emergency or we have a doctor's appointment? And she said, so? And
That's
I said,
great.
yeah, I guess you're right. So I signed up for the class. We met once a week on Zoom. And, once we introduced ourselves and I was honest with my situation, everyone was so astounded that I was there. And, it's amazing. It's amazing. And, it took me a couple of months probably to really figure out this whole writing thing and what my book was and what it was going to look like. But once I did, I was diligent in making sure I scheduled into my day when I was going to write every day, whether it was waking up before Gary woke up and I wrote at 6:00 in the morning, whether if he was in the hospital, I'd bring my computer and when he was sleeping or going down for a test, I would write. And when he was home, I would say, I'm going upstairs for an hour. Unless it's an emergency,
don't knock.
Don't bother me.
Oh, that's incredible. And look at you now. Look over your shoulder there. Your book's there.
Yep. And I was 3 chapters shy when he died.
Wow.
Of finishing. 3 chapters shy. But going back to the self-care for a minute, it was the perfect form of self-care. It was learning a new skill. Who would think that would be something to do at a time like this? But it so was. And I've seen that since then. I learned how to knit right after Gary died, or literally the day before he died, I started. And you know what? It's something about engaging the brain. I don't know what it is, what the physical, real scientific benefits are, but I can just tell you from experience, think about when you're learning something new, how you focus.
It's
right?
The focus. Yeah.
It is.
100%.
And you're push everything else that's going on in your life away. And it was amazing. And after, anyone who has lost a loved one knows that one of the hardest times is after everything's over, right? After the services, the funeral, everybody goes back to their normal lives.
The letters stop,
and
the
you're
text
left.
messages stop. Yep.
You're left with, my life will never be normal.
Totally.
Again. And so my book was due to the editor. Gary passed away on December 30th, 2022. The book was due to the editor January 14th, 2 weeks later.
Whoa.
And of course they said to me, don't be ridiculous. We're going to push it out. And I said, you know what? No, I'm going to finish this because that gave me something else to focus on in that extremely difficult time. And I did. I handed in on January 14th.
Oh, Debbie, that is so inspiring. and so incredible. Um, and there is so much to dive into there. I just want to, I guess, uh, probably circle off on the self-care piece, learning a new skill being number three. Um, so important. And you don't feel like it, but you, from what I'm hearing from you, you said you didn't like to write, you didn't want to write, but there was this sort of calling there that you listened to and you lent into. Um, and aren't you glad that you did? You know, we wouldn't be here
Oh,
chatting if you didn't, and people wouldn't be hearing these stories if you didn't write that book and become the Debbie Weiss that we know today. Um, well done, first of all. Can you tell us the title of the book so that people can pick that
sure.
up?
So the title of my memoir is On Second Thought, Maybe I Can.
Wow.
And the reason for that title is because for the majority of my life, anytime that anything was posed to me, my initial knee-jerk reaction was, I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm not creative. I can't do that. I don't have enough time. I can't do that. I don't have enough money. I'm not, we all have whatever our excuses are. But what I've discovered over the last decade since I turned 50 is that it's really waiting that still might be my first reaction is, no, I can't do that. But if you wait on second thought, well, why not? Maybe I can.
That's a great question.
And
why not?
all the good stuff happens
Mm-hmm.
when you say, maybe I can, or yes, I can.
Love that. And I also love what your therapist said. So it's so simple. So I also love the thought of, if not now, then when? If not now, then when? There's so much that we don't know that we might enjoy. We just think that I haven't been trained in that or wasn't raised around that. So, and even as I'm listening and thinking through this, I'm going now, like, what's some new skills that I don't know that I could pick up that would be incredibly fulfilling, satisfying, thought-provoking, focus intensive. You mentioned focus there, and it really is. It's putting your mind to something. And for everybody listening, maybe you've done that since your loved one died, and you've realized, wow, I really got lost in doing that thing, whether it was gardening, whether it was, cleaning the car, or whether it was painting or writing. You can get lost in those thoughts and those moments, which is a beautiful thing. And we want to make sure that we remove any guilt or shame from that because you're enjoying it. Know that that's part of the process, and it's a really healing part of the process as well. Thank you for sharing that. So on second thought, maybe I can. We're going to link that for everybody below that you can pick that up. I asked you some tough questions last week. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of those again now, just as we wrap up the podcast?
Sure.
I asked you, what's a question that people often fear asking you or don't ask you? And you said, did you resent your husband? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, there were certain times where I did resent him. I resented him for putting so much on my shoulders. I resented him for not being the partner that I wanted and needed. But in hindsight, he wasn't capable. I resented him for not getting the help he needed sooner. And he didn't take care of himself. He did not take care of himself physically or mentally. He never did. But, you can never convince someone of that. And especially me, someone who did have a weight problem, even though, thank goodness, knock on wood, I have always been very healthy and never had any kind of illness due to the weight issues or anything. But I know firsthand you've got to want to do it. You can't convince someone. And when you keep trying to convince someone, it just builds animosity between the two of you.
Yeah,
yes, I resented him.
There is a saying that says, a man convinced of his own will is still of the same opinion still. And so that must have been one of the hardest journeys to walk, when you can see across the other side of the bridge of like what's possible if we just take that step. Debbie, I really commend you for that deep love and staying the course, and then, not knowing that diagnosis would come across Gary's path, and loving him the whole way through. As someone that's walked depression and anxiety myself, and knowing just in a short while my wife walking me through that, to see you do that over a long period of time, all the way up until death. I want to say thank you for honoring as well marriage, because that's what we sign up for in marriage. Until death do us part is something that we don't talk about much. We like the highs and the honeymoons and the joy, but we don't think about that signature that we sign, until death do us part. So thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing and have done over all of these years. We're going to link your book below, and you got to keep me updated on a couple of things. All right. I want to know how the Eagles go twice in a row, and keep me updated on those Jets too, because I'm now on board thanks to you.
Well, come on. Thanks to Gary V. You can tell the truth, Ryan.
Yeah. Well, both of you. I don't know Gary personally. Okay. I only know Debbie Weiss. So
that's right.
It's been amazing having you on. Thanks for sharing so vulnerably as well. And I appreciate you.
Oh, you too. Thank you so much for having me. This has really been like a therapy session. So thank you.
Likewise. You're welcome. Hey, I hope you found this episode as helpful as I have, as personally, I think, as someone going through grief or supporting somebody in a caregiving role. Super practical from Debbie. Those 3 points are great takeaways. 1, learning how to say no and set boundaries. Give yourself 24 hours to really think about and make a decision before you volunteer or say yes to a social invite. Number 2, take care of your body. Set aside time to go play golf, walk the dog, go to Zumba like Debbie, and you'll come back a better human and able to serve from a far greater cup. That's number 2. Number 3, finally, is learning a new skill, whether that is knitting, gardening, sewing, golf, writing like Debbie. Learning a new skill might be learning to sing, could be learning to play squash. So many different things will really help you put your head down, focus in, and learn something that you can really enjoy for many years to come. You might even meet new friends. And I think those 3 areas of self-care are highly important and somewhat simple enough to do. Don't need a whole bunch of money or a whole bunch of time. We can all incorporate those. So once again, thank you to Debbie for joining us today. And if you found this helpful, all we'd ask is that you rate the podcast, give it 5 stars. That'd be super. We'd be super grateful of that. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Bye for now.